wind turbines have overtaken gas as Britain's biggest source of electricity. Wind accounted for 29% of our electricity last year, while gas tumbled to around about a quarter. In the previous year, gas was 32%. This comes as the number of public EV charging points grew by 35%, rising from 53,800 to 73,000 and counting. In a moment, we'll get a view from Donica McCarthy on this one, Director at Climate Media Coalition. First, Chris Morrison, Environment Editor at The Daily Sceptic. Afternoon to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, Ian.
So, is it fair to say that you and I, we've been, wondering about this sort of evangelical movement of wind turbines and solar panels? We got it wrong, apparently, Chris. We were wrong and the greenies were right. Is that what we extrapolate from this headline?
Oh, no, on the contrary. The more wind you put in, the more expensive the whole thing becomes. So this is actually very bad news if wind has actually edged ahead of gas. And the reason is, I'm sure when Donica comes on after me, he'll point out that, of course, it's going to be much, much cheaper. Well, if that's so, how come it needs £16 billion worth of subsidies directly on UK consumers' electricity bills? And that all goes to pay for this green energy. And the more that we put on, the more that price will go up. It gets worse, in fact. The National Grid's control operation have said in its latest report that it will take £44 to £48 billion of extra spending if we want to go to a largely renewable grid. If you actually sort of extrapolate those figures out, there's a chap called David Turvey who works for Daily Sceptic. He also runs a very good subset, a retired engineer, a real whiz with the figures. He's worked out that the figures involved in upgrading the grid, in building these giant windmills, in the capital costs, in subsidising the electricity, all these things are going to cost £700 billion by 2050. Now, if you consider what it's replacing, which is a gas network, which is largely in place, which is cheap gas, whatever they tell you, is relatively cheap energy source. We're sitting on the stuff. We've got masses of the stuff, except, of course, the greenies have all stopped us fracking and drilling for oil. If you consider the damage that that's going to do to our economy, and of course, if you look again, people who argue that gas is much more expensive, why then, out of all the countries in the world that have gone down this ridiculous route of these ghastly wind turbines, Germany and now the UK, they have the highest energy prices in the world. Our energy prices are 3 times higher than they were in 2005 when we were a net exporter of energy. It is destroying our industry. It is destroying, ultimately, it's destroying our industrial base, and ultimately will destroy our society because there won't be any money for anything.
But here's the thing, though, Chris. We're saving the planet, right? I mean, the polar bears are safe. You and I and our kids and grandchildren can, watch them grow up in a safe, clean environment. That dirty old oil was only ever going to tear out their lungs. This is clean, so it might cost a few more quid, but we've got the windmills. And ultimately, when we've paid for the infrastructure, it'll be free.
Oh, yes. Well, as I tried to suggest, it won't be free. It'll be horrendously expensive. But I mean, so let's put that to one side. Is there, and ultimately it comes down, and I think I said to you before on talk, if there is a problem, if it's an existential crisis, we have to do it. We have to get rid of hydrocarbons. It will take us back to almost a pre-industrial age, but we have to do it. And again, as I think I said, on the Daily Sceptic, we look at the science for that reason. And if you look, you'll see that there isn't a climate crisis. Bad weather is not getting worse. A little bit of extra warming has helped food yields. The planet has greened at an astonishing rate, and it's actually greening much, much faster. We've had the Seychelles, for instance, the deserts, the southern Sahara, greening almost before our eyes. We've had food production double because of the use of hydrocarbons. And also we have had this other theory of carbon dioxide. It saturates at certain levels. So where we are now, 400 parts per million, we've been much, much higher in the past, and the temperatures have been lower. So there are other alternative scientific views and papers increasingly becoming, I wouldn't say mainstream, that would be too much. The BBC does all it can to avoid it. But certainly people are becoming much more aware, is there a real problem? Because if there isn't, we are bankrupting ourselves.
There it is, Chris. Thank you. Very thorough stuff from Chris Morrison, environment editor at the Daily Sceptic. Listening to that, Donica McCarthy, director of the Climate Media Coalition. I wondered, Donica, if you might have put the phone down while you were listening to Chris, because he's done the job there, hasn't he? He's explained it, he's laid it out. There are no good arguments around this, and whatever we say about wind overtaking gas, it's going to cost us so much money, we're going to be bankrupt. We'll all die of starvation because we can't afford to buy anything. That's how bad it is. So I don't even know why you exist in this space anymore, Donica. What's happening?
It's terrible. Oh, my God. What a start to 2025. Oh, my God. We've got so much wind turbine. We've actually producing 30% of our energy now from wind. People like Chris Morrison 20 years ago said, wind turbines will never produce any energy. It will never produce a significant amount of energy. Here we are 20 years later, and 30% of our energy is coming from wind. It's proving what we said 10 years ago. I mean, we can't count anything that this guy says is serious. If he dismisses the agreed science by every single major scientific institution on the planet, we can't take him seriously. And let's look at the facts. Let's look at the economics. There are now 650,000 green jobs in the United Kingdom, Ian. To actually say that we're deindustrializing because we're going green is absolute nonsense. There are 30,000 jobs left in the legacy oil industry. So I actually think what we're looking at is a new green economy that will be good for Britain and good for the environment. Let's look at the costs of wind energy. The latest stats from the Department of Environment outline the costs of each form of energy. It was £44 per megawatt for offshore wind, £41 for onshore wind, £38 for solar, and £114 for gas. And his point is right. We have the most expensive electricity in Europe at the moment. Why? Because our electricity price is pegged to the most expensive electricity feeding into the grid at any one time. So that means if we've even just got 10% gas, the price is fixed by gas, and gas is £114 versus £38 for solar, and that's why we've got a problem with the costs of this. It's the fossil fuel is hammering us, not the green energy.
One of Chris's points, Donica, as you would have heard, is that to fully implement and construct this game-changing, a new economy, as it were, a new industrial revolution, to do all of that is hundreds of millions of pounds worth of money required. In that time, the free wind energy ain't going to be manifesting anytime soon because we've got to pay for it. That could take decades and decades and decades when we're already sitting on enough fuel via oil to make sure we can all turn the lights on and drive our cars, etc. And the world isn't dying as a result. So to him, it's just yes, you would end up with this kind of green utopia, but there's no reason to want to get there, is Chris's point.
Well, there's many reasons. First of all, the large majority of the British public don't agree with Chris. They actually think the government should be taking more action tackling the climate crisis that's unfolding before our eyes. British consumers are already paying for the costs in rising food prices because of extreme weather across the planet. But British consumers are already paying the costs of extreme weather as they pay higher insurance costs for their homes due to increased flooding. There's been a 7 to 10% increase in extreme flooding in the United Kingdom. We're paying the price. And what he's calling for is what I would call socialist corporatism. He wants the state to pay the costs for the profits of the oil industry. And actually, the idea of keeping us addicted to the oil economy is nuts. You're not as old as me, Ian, but I have lived through 3 to 4 oil economic shocks to this country. It has hammered our economy when there's a sudden spike in oil prices. And it cost us £70 billion 2 years ago with the Ukraine oil shock. What Ed Miliband is absolutely right. We need to protect British security and British energy as fast as possible by weaning us off the international oil and gas market. Drilling more for oil and gas doesn't wean us off the oil market. It keeps us addicted, and that's bad for Britain, and it's bad for our future.
Here's a question, Donica, that came in for you from Rob, Rob's on a boat in Thameside. He says, can you ask your environmental evangelist the simple question, what is more important, the UK economy or net zero?
It's a false dichotomy, because actually going for a clean energy economy wins for the economy and wins for climate. So it's actually a win-win. Look, at the facts are, over the last 20 years, Ian, we have cut our carbon emissions by 50%, and our GDP has gone up by over 90%. We are greening and we're getting richer. It's possible to do both. Look at me at the moment. Actually, I'm just looking around. At lunchtime today, my solar panels were charging up my solar battery for my e-bike. They were heating my house, and they're powering my laptop. Over the year, my solar panels give me a profit for my gas and electricity consumption of £300 a year. I want that for every household in Britain as soon as possible.
But am I right in saying, though, Donica, you tried a windmill and it couldn't even power your hairdryer? Is that what happened? That's the word on the street.
Sure. I as an environmentalist and somebody who agrees on who actually is horrified by the science that's unfolding before our eyes, I believe in practicing what I preach and trial things out. So in my house, I have an old 1840s cottage in the heart of London. I've tried solid wall insulation, which has worked really well. I've tried thermal hot water, which is good, but I wouldn't do it again. I've tried solar, and I've tried an experimental wind turbine. What it does, it produces enough electricity to power my laptop and my lights. That's not very good. And so what the facts with wind turbines is, if you double the length of the blade, you double the power coming out of it. So a small wind turbine for a house is not going to do hardly any good. You have to have a reasonably sized turbine. And the turbines today are extraordinary. When I started on this path in the 90s, Ian, when I became aware of the series of the science, you know what the wind turbine industry in the United Kingdom consisted of? 2 guys with 2 sheds in their backyard. They were selling small turbines for off-grid cottages. It has gone from that, a couple £100 per turbine, to amazing multi-billion-pound industry that is weaning Britain off our oil addiction. That's good for everybody.
Donica, thank you. Donica McCarthy. He is the director at the Climate Media Coalition. You heard 2 voices there. Which one do you concur with? Both arguing quite emphatically. Chris there, from the environment editor at the Daily Sceptic, saying this is it's just an industry that's not even needed. So we're going to rip everything up, start again at the cost of hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in order to create something that is surplus to requirements. We already have loads of stuff to power our houses, drive our cars. Don't need this malarkey. Donica couldn't disagree more passionately.